The room was completely silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence. Not the calm kind. This was the kind of silence that presses against your chest. The kind that makes breathing feel heavier than it should. The kind that forces two people to sit face to face with something they never imagined they'd have to survive. It was early morning. Sunlight barely pushed its way through the curtains, painting soft lines across the bedroom wall. Abby sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands rested on her stomach. Not because there was movement, but because there wasn't. Across the room, Matt stood frozen. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anything. He was staring at the floor, as if the ground itself had just betrayed him. Hours earlier, they had been two parents waiting for their baby. Now, they were two parents trying to understand how their baby was gone. And months later, on the exact day their daughter Emerson Nicole was supposed to enter the world, they would face a moment neither of them were prepared for. A date that once held promise, now held grief. And what happened on that day would change them forever. Because sometimes, the hardest part of losing someone is loving them on the day they were supposed to arrive. Introduction. Why this story matters. Millions of people knew Matt Howard and Abby Howard as the smiling couple on their screens. They were the ones who laughed together. The ones who shared their real lives. Their marriage. Their struggles. Their dreams of building a family. People watched them fall in love. Watched them grow. Watched them become parents. But what most people didn't see was the quiet pain behind the camera. The kind of pain that doesn't make noise. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives suddenly and changes everything. Pregnancy loss is something millions experience. Yet somehow, when it happens, it feels like you're the only person in the world. It feels isolating, confusing, unfair. And the hardest part isn't always the moment of loss. Sometimes, the hardest part is what comes after. The empty space, the unanswered questions, and the dates that never stop coming. Especially the due date. The day that was supposed to be filled with cries, laughter, and new beginnings. Instead, becomes a reminder of what never got the chance to be. This is the story of that day. But more importantly, this is the story of the love that never disappeared. Background and setup. Before the loss. Before the silence. Before the date that would haunt them. There was hope. Simple, beautiful hope. Matt and Abby had always talked about having a family. It wasn't just an idea. It wasn't just something distant. It was something they could see clearly. Something they wanted deeply. They had built their lives step by step. Through college. Through marriage. Through the uncertainty of chasing dreams online. They faced criticism. Doubt. Pressure. But they faced it together. And together, they were strong. The first time Abby saw those two pink lines, her heart raced. Her hands trembled. She stared at the test longer than she needed to. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she was afraid to. Afraid that believing it would make it too real, too fragile. She walked slowly into the room where Matt was sitting. He looked up, immediately sensing something was different. She didn't speak at first. She just handed him the test. He stared at it, his brain trying to catch up with what his eyes already knew. And then, he looked at her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their eyes said everything. This was the beginning. Or at least, that's what they thought. The first signs of love. Pregnancy changes everything. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Abby noticed it in small moments. The way she instinctively protected her stomach. The way her thoughts began including someone she hadn't even met. Every decision suddenly mattered more. Every choice carried weight. Matt noticed it too. He noticed how she held herself differently. More carefully. More consciously. He noticed how she smiled at nothing sometimes. As if she were already having conversations with someone invisible. Late at night, they would talk about the future. What their baby would look like. Who they would become. They talked about names. About first steps, first words, first birthdays, all the moments that make parenthood real. It wasn't just imagination anymore. It was expectation. It was love forming in advance. And love like that doesn't disappear easily. The name, Emerson Nicole. Choosing a name is never just choosing a name. It's choosing an identity, a future, a person. Emerson Nicole. They said it quietly at first, testing how it sounded in the air. Matt whispered it once when Abby was asleep, just to feel what it would be like. Emerson. His daughter. He smiled. He imagined holding her. Imagined protecting her. Imagined teaching her everything he knew. Abby would rest her hand on her stomach and say the name softly, as if Emerson could hear her. As if Emerson already knew she was loved. Because she was. Deeply. Completely. Unconditionally. Even before she ever entered the world. But what happened next was something neither of them could prepare for. Something no parent ever truly prepares for. And when it happened, time didn't stop. But it felt like it did. Rising conflict. When something felt wrong. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly. Quietly. Almost invisibly. At first, it was just a feeling. A subtle shift Abby couldn't explain. Her body felt different. Not in the normal ways. In ways she couldn't describe. She told herself it was nothing. Told herself she was overthinking. But deep down, she knew. Mothers often know. Even when they don't want to. Even when they hope they're wrong. Matt noticed her silence. Not dramatic silence. Just quieter than usual. Less certain. Less light. He asked if she was okay. She said yes. Because sometimes saying no makes it real. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Days passed. Each one heavier than the last. Each one filled with quiet fear. Fear neither of them wanted to speak out loud. Because saying it might make it true. And then, one moment changed everything. The moment that altered their lives forever. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Too quiet. A doctor's office. Cold air. White walls. Machines humming softly. The kind of place where lives begin. And sometimes, where they don't. Abby lay still. Matt held her hand. Neither of them spoke. They watched the screen. Waiting. Hoping. Expecting reassurance. Instead, there was hesitation. A pause too long to ignore. The doctor's face changed. Not drastically, but enough. Enough for Matt's stomach to drop. Enough for Abby's heart to sink. And in that moment, without words, they both knew. Something was wrong. Something they couldn't fix. Something they couldn't undo. Something that would stay with them forever. What happened next was the moment their lives split into two timelines. Before and after. And nothing would ever be the same again. The doctor didn't speak immediately. And somehow, that silence said everything. The machine beside Abby hummed softly, its mechanical rhythm indifferent to the human heartbreak unfolding in that small, sterile room. Matt tightened his grip on Abby's hand. Not because he understood, but because he didn't. He was waiting for the doctor to say something reassuring. Something logical. Something that would explain the pause. Because pauses like that weren't supposed to happen. Not in moments like this. Not when you were waiting to hear your baby's heartbeat. The doctor shifted slightly. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't careless. It was careful. And that made it worse. She turned toward them slowly. And in that moment, Abby stopped breathing. Her entire body froze, as if instinctively bracing for impact. "I'm so sorry." 4 words. 4 small, ordinary words. But those words shattered their world completely. Matt blinked, his brain rejecting the sentence before it could fully form meaning. I'm not finding a heartbeat. The room tilted. Not physically. Emotionally. Reality itself seemed to lose balance. Abby stared at the ceiling. Her eyes wide. Unblinking. waiting for the doctor to correct herself, waiting for her to say she was mistaken, waiting for anything that would undo what had just been said. But nothing came. Only silence. Heavy, permanent silence. Matt shook his head slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to signal disbelief. No, he whispered. Not as a question. As a refusal. Because how do you accept something that makes no sense? How do you accept losing someone you never even got to meet? The doctor explained gently, carefully, but the words blurred together. Medical terms, statistics, explanations. None of it mattered. None of it changed the truth. Their daughter was gone. Emerson Nicole, the name they had whispered with love, now existed only in memory. And what hurt most was that their love for her didn't disappear. It had nowhere to go. It stayed, trapped inside them, with no place to land. The drive home. They didn't talk on the way home. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Words felt useless, powerless. Matt kept both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed forward, focused on the road, because focusing on anything else would break him. Beside him, Abby stared out the window. The world outside looked exactly the same. People walked. Cars moved. Life continued. It didn't stop. It didn't pause. It didn't acknowledge that their world had just ended. And that was the cruelest part. Grief is invisible. The world doesn't see it, doesn't feel it, doesn't stop for it. To everyone else, it was just another day. But for Matt and Abby, it was the day they lost their daughter. Abby placed her hand gently on her stomach, the same place she had rested her hand with love for weeks. Now it felt different. Not empty, because empty suggests nothing was ever there. This wasn't empty. This was absence. And absence carries weight. Matt glanced at her briefly. He wanted to say something. Anything. But there were no words strong enough to hold what they were feeling. So he said nothing. And somehow, that silence said everything. The first night. Nighttime made it worse. Daytime offered distraction. Noise. Movement. Temporary escape. But nighttime brought stillness. And stillness brings truth. They lay in bed, side by side, facing opposite directions. Not because they didn't love each other, but because they didn't know how to hold each other without breaking. Matt stared at the wall, his mind replaying every moment, every appointment, every heartbeat they had once heard, every dream they had imagined. He questioned everything. What if he had done something differently? What if they had caught it sooner? What if? What if? What if? The questions had no answers. But they came anyway. Beside him, Abby cried silently. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears slipping into her pillow. Because grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers. And those whispers are louder than anything else. Matt heard her breathing change. He knew she was crying. He wanted to turn around. He wanted to hold her. But he was afraid. Afraid that if he moved, he wouldn't be able to stop his own tears. Afraid that if he faced her pain directly, it would make it undeniable. Permanent. Real. But eventually, he couldn't stay still anymore. He turned slowly. And when Abby felt him move, she turned too. Their eyes met. And in that moment, no words were needed. They moved closer, wrapped their arms around each other, and held on. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the only thing they could do. And sometimes, holding on is the only way to survive. The days that followed. Grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't follow schedules. It doesn't move logically. Some moments felt normal, almost peaceful. And then suddenly, without warning, the pain would return. Stronger, sharper, unforgiving. Matt would hear a song, and it would remind him of Emerson. Abby would see a baby in public, and her chest would tighten. Not out of jealousy, but out of longing. longing for something that had been real and was now gone. Friends offered support. Family offered comfort. But grief is deeply personal. No one else had known Emerson the way they did. No one else had dreamed her future. No one else had whispered her name in quiet moments. Emerson existed in their hearts. And losing her meant carrying that loss forever. The question no one talks about. People often ask parents when they'll move on. But no one explains how. Because you don't move on from losing your child. You move forward. And those are very different things. Moving on suggests leaving them behind. Moving forward means carrying them with you. Matt realized this slowly. In small moments. Moments when he caught himself thinking about her. Moments when he imagined who she would have been. He wasn't forgetting her. He was learning how to live with her absence. And that process was the hardest thing he had ever done. Abby felt it too. Especially in quiet moments. Especially when she was alone. She would place her hand on her stomach out of habit. And then remember. And that moment of remembering hurt every single time. But what they didn't realize yet was that one specific day was coming. A day they couldn't avoid. A day they couldn't ignore. A day that would force them to face everything. The due date. The day Emerson Nicole was supposed to be born. And when that day arrived, nothing could prepare them for how it would feel. The date approaches. At first, it felt distant. Just a number on a calendar. Easy to ignore. Easy to avoid thinking about. But dates don't disappear. They get closer. Quietly. Inevitably. Matt noticed it first. He was scrolling through his phone, checking something unrelated. When he saw it, the date, his stomach dropped instantly. He froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't say anything, but his mind was already there, already imagining what that day would have looked like. A hospital room. Tears of joy. Holding Emerson for the first time. Instead, there would be silence. He locked his phone and set it down. He wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. But Abby already knew. Because she had been counting the days too. Not intentionally, but subconsciously. Her body remembered. Her heart remembered. And as the date got closer, so did the pain. What they didn't know was that the due date wouldn't just bring grief. It would bring something else. Something unexpected. Something that would change how they saw everything. But first, they had to survive the day itself. The morning of Emerson Nicole's due date didn't announce itself loudly. There were no alarms. No reminders. No dramatic signals that this day was different from any other. But Matt felt it the moment he opened his eyes. Before he even checked the calendar. Before he even looked at his phone. His body knew. There's something strange about dates like that. You don't need to see them to feel them. They live inside you. Quiet. Waiting. He lay still in bed. The room looked the same. The ceiling hadn't changed. The light filtering through the curtains hadn't changed. But something inside him had. Beside him, Abby was already awake. He could tell by the way she was breathing. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. Not the breathing of someone resting. The breathing of someone thinking. The breathing of someone bracing themselves. Neither of them spoke at first. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And once it was real, there would be no escaping it. Finally, Abby whispered softly into the silence. It's today. Her voice didn't break. But it was fragile. Matt swallowed. His throat felt tight. I know. 2 simple words. But they carried the weight of everything. This was the day Emerson Nicole was supposed to arrive. This was the day they were supposed to become parents to her. This was the day that was supposed to change their lives forever. And it still had. Just not in the way they imagined. The invisible presence. The strange thing about grief is that it makes someone feel both absent and present at the same time. Emerson wasn't there. But she was everywhere. In their thoughts. In their memories. In the quiet space between their words. Matt sat up slowly. He didn't want to rush the moment. Because rushing would feel like avoidance. and avoidance felt like betrayal. He walked toward the window. Outside, the world continued as normal. Neighbors walked their dogs. Cars passed by. Someone laughed in the distance. Life was happening, unaware, unchanged. And Matt realized something that hit him harder than he expected. Today, somewhere else in the world, other parents were meeting their babies. Other fathers were holding their daughters for the first time. Other mothers were hearing their baby cry. But not them. Not today. And that reality felt unbearably unfair. He closed his eyes